Welcome, my friends, to the Bob and Brad podcast. My name is Mike Keenitz, and I'm a PT assistant. Today, I'm interviewing Rick Olderman, who is a physical therapist, and we are discussing his new book, which is coming out early next year in 2023. It is called Solving the Pain Puzzle, Cases from 25 Years as a Physical Therapist. So without further ado, here is Rick. All right, welcome back to the show, Rick.
Thanks. Good to be here, Mike. Thanks.
Today, we're going to be talking about your new book, which is called Solving the Pain Puzzle, Cases from 25 Years as a Physical Therapist. Here is a picture of it for our audience watching. Oh, it's not out yet, though, is it?
No, it's they can pre-order it if they want, and I have a link on my website, and maybe there'll be a link in the show notes here too.
When is it coming out?
I think it's coming out early 2023.
Okay. Could you tell us what this book is about?
Sure. I wrote this other series of books called the Fixing You series back about 10 or 12 years ago. And over the years, many people have commented that, well, let me get back up a little bit. In that series, I feature the anatomy and physiology of why we're having pain and what's going wrong. And then I have these client connection stories that are usually a paragraph or maybe two, that kind of illustrate in a person how these principles worked in this particular patient. And over the years, people have said, you know what, I really identify with Dave in that one story of yours, and that is me to a T. And gosh, I would have loved to learn more about him, and his story and how he solved it, and that went with just about every other client connection story I had in all of my books. So I thought, you know what, let's just flip this on its head and let's make this more about the patients I've helped, integrating some of these concepts, but it's not so much anatomy and physiology heavy. It's more of my thinking and how we work through their problem. So my hope is that I want to give, because some people they don't like a lot of anatomy. It confuses them and all that kind of stuff. And so these stories are for those people who maybe want to hear more about how I helped a person rather than the anatomy and physiology behind a pain issue.
So this book is much more for the lay person versus a therapist.
Oh yeah, definitely. My other books I thought were for lay people too, but apparently not enough. And so this one's definitely for lay people more. But also, I'm always trying to reach therapists and other medical providers, because this is a whole new paradigm of thinking and working with the body. And so this book is kind of my proof of how and that it works across all types of injuries and populations, ages, what have you. And they're all chronic pain stories of people who just couldn't get solutions with anyone else and were at the end of their rope. So that's the kind of person I typically see.
So could you give us one of the stories from the book or an example from it?
Yeah, well, I can do even better. On my rickolderman.com website, you can read 3 of the stories. I've put them on that site, and I've also created audio files of those 3 stories, so you can just listen to me reading it if you want to. Oh. But for one of the stories, let's say, one of them was this guy with sciatic pain, and he had this for, I think it was 8 years, and he came into the clinic really skeptical because he had been around the block. He had even had, I think, 2 surgeries to correct a disc bulge, and he had a laminectomy to release pressure on his spinal column. Didn't help. He had been to all sorts of, other types of practitioners. Nothing was helping. And so his doctor, because I worked with a lot of his doctor's patients, his doctor finally said, "Hey, you should really go see this guy." And, anyway, he was so doubtful, but in our very first session, and everyone told him that it was coming from his back. After evaluating him, I didn't think it was coming from his back at all. And so in our very first session, we completely took all of his 8 years of pain away, and it never came back, and with just one exercise. And what it was, it ended up being a hip tracking issue. And I solved those pretty fast using a butt pump exercise. So I had him roll over on his hands and knees. He did 2 sets of butt pumps. He rolled back over on his back to do his straight leg test, and his leg just shot up 90 degrees. No pain at all. He did it like 10 times in a row. He couldn't believe it. And as long as he did his butt pumps, his pain was solved.
You had me do those butt pumps yesterday, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah. If people are listening, Rick made me try to figure out my hip pain, and he goes through those in the video. So if you want to watch what he's talking about, I can link it down below.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why everyone thought he had a back issue because it was sciatic nerve pain. And so the assumption is that it must be coming from the spine. And so that's where everyone looks, because that's what we're trained to do in medicine, right? But what we're not trained, and this is what I'm trying to get through in the book, is that my approach is a systems thinking approach. It looks at the entire body in terms of how it's working. This is really how the body works. And this is why we have chronic pain, is because no one else we're not trained to look at the body as a system. Strangely enough, you would think in physical therapy, we would be trained to do this, but we haven't been. We've been trained to look at it as a series of components. And so these 25 years, I've taken the time to put all of these components together into a unifying approach to solve chronic pain. And this book is basically showing the readers how this stuff works in simple terms, to give them hope that you're not broken. We can fix these things.
So is this book more like stories, or is it also like the exercises as well?
It's not the exercises, it's the stories. I've provided the exercises in my Fixing You series.
Yep.
So these are the stories, because I think they'll help people see how this works in maybe them. If they have sciatic pain and they haven't had help, and they read this story of this guy where the butt pumps, where no one else had even looked at his hips. And this is why he had chronic pain. And this is what I'm trying to say is, and I have another story on my website for 3 people with migraines and neck pain, chronic. It had nothing to do with their neck and head. It was their shoulder girdle complex that was causing all of this stuff. And so, but no one looked at those things because they don't understand the connections, how they're connected. And this includes neurosurgeons, orthopedic surgeons. It's not their job to really understand these connections. It's our job as physical therapists. So I don't blame doctors for not knowing this stuff. I do blame us as a profession for not knowing it, because people far smarter than me have been doing this stuff for much longer than I have. But that's not where our focus continues to be on understanding tiny, smaller and smaller components of how the body works, but not how the whole thing works. And that's why I think we're missing. That's what my book is about.
So Bob has said that from reading your books and taking your courses that you go through some extreme lengths to solve patient problems, meaning you call the doctors, you do your research. That's the extreme length. So do you look at each case as like a personal challenge?
I do. Once I am on someone's case, they do not shake me until they're better. And there's only one story in that book where I couldn't solve this person's pain. I still haven't been able to solve her pain. She has a very unusual issue going on, but this is the problem, is that a lot of her practitioners are not trying hard to figure it out. What they're doing is throwing the standard tests at her, and when things come back negative, they're just like, oh well, I didn't see anything, so I have nothing for you. And it's just like where there's no one really taking up the gauntlet. And that's what I typically do for my patients is, look, we're going to get through this one way or another. If you need surgery, I'm going to help you with that, in terms of guiding you that you need the surgery and helping you with that rehab. And if you don't need the surgery, we're going to figure out what's at the bottom of this. I just don't give up. And that's what drove me. I think I realized after writing this book, I think I have a little bit of OCD and anxiety because I was just so haunted by every single patient who wasn't getting better. I had to understand why, or else I felt I wasn't doing my job. And so that's what led to the uncovering of all of these ideas that are in this book and in my Fixing You series of books.
Well, that's just a good physical therapist, because most people just, when they're off your caseload, you just kind of forget about them.
Well, yeah, but yeah, I put a lot of pressure on myself to solve this stuff, and I feel that there is a bit of anxiety and maybe OCD involved here because I was just maybe a little bit too committed.
As long as you use it in a good way, there's probably no
Yeah,
problem with those things.
that's a good example of using what could potentially be a negative for a positive.
So have you, I know we've had this happen, but have you had people come see you and immediately you're just like, I think you just need to have surgery? Has that
Yes,
ever happened?
sometimes that happens. Rarely, but it
Mhm.
has happened before. I had a young guy, and he had shoulder pain. I evaluated his shoulder. I was pretty darn sure that he had a labral tear.
Oh,
And so I sent him back to his orthopod, and I said, please, give him an MRI. I believe he has a labral tear. Well, the insurance company refused to do that because I didn't spend 10 sessions with him. Well, if you're sending him to me because this is my specialty, this is my assessment, this is what I think he needs, why would I spend 9 more sessions with him, wasting all of our time if I'm 99% sure he has a labral tear? And so because that happened initially, he couldn't, he would never get that MRI. And so no one could ever confirm it because once it's refuted by the insurance company, they never changed their mind again.
yeah. So what happened?
I, I told him I would work with him, but I don't think it would work, but I would happy to see if I was wrong.
Yeah.
But he was just like, you know what, if that's what you think is going on, and the insurance company won't do it, I don't want to spend 9 more sessions seeing you for something that you probably won't be able to help me with. That just seems like a waste of my time and money.
Yeah.
So I said, fair enough. But if you end up having an MRI and getting shoulder surgery, please contact me. Let me know what's going on. And I never heard from him again. I think he's like so many. This is one of the things that I've learned is when I had my first job out in a small town in southwestern Colorado and I couldn't solve people, I thought I was a really terrible therapist. And I was, because I didn't understand any of this stuff. But then when I moved to here, Denver, and I went to work in a really busy athletic club as their physical therapist, and they had never had a physical therapist at their club before, my schedule was instantly full of tons of people with chronic nagging pain issues. All of these people were, could afford any treatment that they wanted, but no matter what they could afford, no one could give them the answers. So I realized, oh, this isn't just me being a terrible therapist. Something is failing all of these people. And, I just decided I could either quit physical therapy or I could try and figure it out. And so I went the second route. And
I think everyone's glad you went the second route.
Well, I don't know. I hope so. I mean, it's made my work so much more rewarding, knowing that pretty much anyone who comes to see me, I know I have something for them. So
Sure.
It's been rewarding, and my anxiety level has gone way down. The more answers I get, the less my anxiety level is.
All right. So what do you hope people will get out of this book?
Well, my first and foremost is I hope that they can find something of themselves in some of these stories. And if they can, then they should be given hope. Because this is the thing that I see in most people who came to my clinic who had been through a lot of practitioners is they had lost hope. They were skeptical anyone could help them. There was nothing new under the sun. I went to the best. I went to the Mayo Clinic. I went to the Cleveland Clinic. I talked to the top surgeons. I talked to whoever, and no one has been able to help me. And this is because they're all working off the same kind of information and the same approach to looking at you, which is this component approach, looking at structures only and not understanding the system. And so my hope is that people reading this book will say, oh, I didn't even know this kind of stuff was possible. Maybe this is what's behind my pain. And that's why I thought going more into the people's stories rather than me talking about the anatomy and physiology would help people see hope that they can be helped and find that help.
So where can people go to find more information about you or pre-order the book?
Well, you can go to rickolderman.com and you'll see you can pre-order the book there. And then I've also got home programs that people can download to solve their pain, uh, which is based on a lot of my last 25 years experience. And all those concepts that I used in those home programs are found in this book too. And then if you're a practitioner who wants to learn this approach to solving pain, I also have a link to my online practitioners course there too.
And like I said in our other podcast, Bob and Brad are taking your continuing ed courses. So
Yeah.
I'm finding them very helpful.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a completely fresh and new perspective on pain and why we're having it and how our bodies should be working. And I feel, part of me is just like, are you kidding me? Who are you to get up here and talk about this stuff? Because I just consider myself an average. I'm not like superhuman intelligent or anything like that, but I am tenacious. And I did have that anxiety that drove my search for all of this. And I think that's the only reason I figured it out is because, I was just tenacious and I felt I needed to in order for me to feel mentally healthy.
So is there anything else you want to add about the book?
No, I just hope it would be great if people pre-ordered it. I'd love to be the first physical therapist that reached the New York Times bestseller list. And, but anyway, I think there's a lot of valuable kernels in there. And if you watch all of these videos and you're still not sure what I'm doing or what I'm talking about, this book will really help give you a more complete idea of really what I'm talking about with all of the systems thinking stuff and how it applies to real patients.
So is there an audio book too? Because you said you read some of it.
Well, the publisher who is publishing the book may ask me to do an audio version, or they may hire someone to do an audio version. But for the 3 chapters I put on my website, I just decided to just do the audio versions myself. So I don't have a professional studio to do all this stuff in. So it's just me reading the chapters, and because some people prefer that.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it.